A long time ago, in a prosperous kingdom, there was a wise and just king. Among his many advisors, 3 ministers were particularly close to him. They had served him for years, helping to govern the land and making important decisions. The king valued their advice and relied on their loyalty. However, over time, he began to sense that something was not right. Rumors had reached his ears, whispers of dishonesty, laziness, and corruption among his ministers. But there was no clear proof. Despite their reputation for being trustworthy, the king had a growing suspicion that one of them was not as honest as he seemed. He observed them carefully, watching their actions and decisions, but he couldn't determine which one was unworthy of his trust. It was a troubling thought. If one of his closest advisors was dishonest, it could threaten the stability of the kingdom. A corrupt minister could misuse resources, deceive the people, or even betray the king himself. He knew he had to act quickly before any real damage was done. Rather than confronting them directly, the king decided to set a clever test. He wanted to observe their true character through their own choices, not just their words. He devised a plan that would reveal their honesty, work ethic, and sense of responsibility. Calling the 3 ministers to his court, he handed each of them an identical empty bag. He then gave them a simple task. They were to go into the dense forests surrounding the kingdom and fill their bags with the best fruits they could find. There was no supervision, no guards to watch over them, and no one to check their work along the way. Each minister would have to make his own decision about how to complete the task. The king knew that their choices would reveal the truth about their character. Would they be diligent and honest, or would they take shortcuts? The answer would determine their fate. Early the next morning, the 3 ministers stood before the king, waiting for their orders. The king's expression was calm but serious as he handed each of them an empty bag. "Take this," he instructed, "and head into the forest. Your task is simple. Fill your bag with the best fruits you can find. You have 1 day to complete this mission." The ministers exchanged glances. The task seemed straightforward, but they knew the king never acted without reason. Still, they had no choice but to obey. Without further explanation, the king signaled his guards, and they led the ministers to different parts of the vast forest, ensuring that each man would have to work alone. As the ministers entered the wilderness, they were surrounded by towering trees, thick bushes, and the sounds of nature. The forest was full of fruits, some fresh and ripe, others spoiled and unfit to eat. The challenge was not just about gathering food, it was about making the right choices. The first minister took his task seriously. Determined to do his best, he carefully examined each fruit before placing it in his bag. He climbed trees, pushed through thorny bushes, and spent hours ensuring that every piece he collected was of the highest quality. He believed that if the king had given them this task, there must be a reason behind it. The second minister, however, was less diligent. He figured the king wouldn't personally inspect the fruit. So why put in too much effort? He picked whatever was easiest to grab. Some fruits were fresh, but many were bruised or rotting. He knew he could have done better, but he convinced himself that it wouldn't matter in the end. The third minister, on the other hand, was completely indifferent. Instead of gathering fruit, he filled his bag with dry leaves and stones, thinking that as long as his bag looked full, the king wouldn't question its contents. He saw no reason to put in any real effort, believing he had outsmarted the system. With their bags full, the ministers made their way back to the palace, unaware of the true purpose of their task. As soon as the first minister entered the dense forest, he took a deep breath and focused on the task at hand. He had no idea why the king had assigned them this duty, but he was determined to do it with honesty and dedication. He believed that every responsibility, no matter how simple it seemed, should be carried out with sincerity. Without wasting time, he started searching for the best fruits the forest had to offer. The minister carefully examined each tree, looking for ripe, healthy fruits. He avoided any that were overripe, rotten, or had insect bites. Some fruits hung high on branches, beyond easy reach, but he didn't hesitate to climb the trees, stretching his arms to pluck them one by one. He knew it would take extra effort, but he wanted to ensure his bag was filled with only the freshest and highest quality produce. As he moved deeper into the forest, he encountered thorny bushes and uneven ground, but he didn't let these obstacles slow him down. His clothes became dirty, his hands got scratched, and sweat dripped from his forehead, yet he continued his work with determination. He understood that effort and perseverance were necessary for success, and he was willing to put in the hard work. By midday, his bag was half full, but he didn't let exhaustion distract him. He kept going, carefully selecting and collecting until the sun started to set. When his bag was finally full, he looked at it with satisfaction, knowing that he had done his best. Unlike the others, he never considered taking shortcuts. He never thought about filling his bag with leaves, rotten fruits, or anything that would make the task easier. For him, it was not just about completing an assignment. It was about proving his integrity, discipline, and work ethic. With a sense of pride and confidence, he carried his heavy bag back to the palace. He didn't know what awaited him, but one thing was certain: whatever the king had planned, he was ready to face the outcome with no regrets. The second minister walked into the forest with his bag slung over his shoulder, looking around with mild interest. Unlike the first minister, he wasn't too concerned about picking the best fruits. As far as he was concerned, the king had simply given them a task to complete, nothing more, nothing less. He didn't see the point in wasting time carefully selecting each piece of fruit when he could just grab whatever was easiest. At first, he made a slight effort to pick decent-looking fruits, but soon he grew tired of searching. He looked around and noticed plenty of fruits already lying on the ground. Why bother climbing trees or walking deeper into the forest, he thought. The king isn't going to inspect every single fruit in my bag. As long as my bag is full, it should be fine. With this mindset, he started scooping up whatever fruits were within reach without checking their condition. Some were fresh, but many were overripe, bruised, or partially eaten by insects and animals. He occasionally tossed aside the worst-looking ones, but most of the time, he didn't bother. After all, filling the bag quickly was easier than putting in real effort. The day dragged on, and as the sun began to set, his bag was full, though its contents were a mix of good and bad. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and smirked. That wasn't so hard, he thought. He imagined the king glancing at their bags, nodding in approval and moving on, feeling satisfied with his smart approach. He made his way back to the palace. He didn't feel guilty, if anything. He thought he had outwitted the system. Hard work, in his opinion, was for those who didn't know how to take advantage of easier options. Little did he know that his choices that day would soon determine his fate in a way he never expected. The third minister entered the forest with a sigh, dragging his bag behind him. He looked around at the trees, the thick undergrowth, and the endless supply of fruits hanging from branches. Unlike the first minister, who worked diligently, or even the second minister, who at least put in some effort, this minister had no intention of doing any real work. He believed that the king's test was meaningless, and he wasn't about to waste his energy collecting fruit. As he strolled through the forest, he laughed to himself. "Why should I struggle to find the best fruits when I can just make it look like I did?" he thought. In his mind, the king wasn't going to open the bags and check their contents. He would only see if they were full. And if that was the case, why should he even bother gathering fruit at all? With a smirk, he bent down and started stuffing his bag with dry leaves, twigs, and small stones. They were lightweight, easy to gather, and filled up space quickly. Within a short time, his bag looked just as full as the others, but without the effort. He wiped the non-existent sweat from his brow and chuckled. "That was easy," he muttered, feeling proud of his own cleverness. He spent the rest of the day lounging under a tree, relaxing while the other ministers worked tirelessly. He didn't once stop to consider the consequences of his actions. To him, the task was just a game, and he had found the easiest way to win. As evening approached, he hoisted his bag over his shoulder and walked back toward the palace, feeling smug. He was confident that he had outsmarted the king's test. "Hard work is for fools," he thought. "I got the same results without lifting a finger." What he didn't realize was that his laziness and dishonesty would soon cost him everything. The test was far from over, and he had unknowingly sealed his own fate. When the three ministers returned to the palace, they stood before the king, expecting him to inspect their bags. However, to their surprise, the king did not open them. He did not ask any questions about the fruits they had gathered, nor did he comment on the effort they had put in. Instead, he turned to his guards and gave an unexpected command. "Take them to the palace prison," the king ordered. "They will be locked away for 30 days. They will receive no food or water from the outside. They must survive on whatever they have brought with them." A wave of shock washed over the ministers. They had expected a reward, perhaps some praise, or at worst, a simple evaluation of their work. None of them had imagined that their survival would depend entirely on what they had placed inside their bags. The first minister, though surprised, remained calm. He had worked hard and filled his bag with fresh, nutritious fruits. He knew he had enough to sustain himself through the coming days. The second minister's heart pounded. He had gathered fruits, but many of them were rotten. He wasn't sure how long he could survive on spoiled food, but at least he had something to eat. The third minister, however, felt his stomach drop. His bag contained nothing but dry leaves and stones, useless, inedible items. The weight of his own laziness and dishonesty crashed down on him. He had never expected such a consequence, and now there was no way to undo his mistake. The guards led the ministers away, locking them in separate cells. Each of them would now face the direct result of their own actions. The first minister sat down with confidence, knowing he was well prepared. The second minister hesitated, realizing the difficulty ahead. The third minister, filled with regret and fear, stared at his empty hands, understanding too late that his deceit had led him straight to disaster. As the prison doors shut behind him, the first minister took a deep breath and sat down, his bag of fruits beside him. Unlike the others, he felt no fear. He had worked hard, made wise choices, and now his efforts would sustain him. Carefully, he opened his bag and examined the fruits he had collected. They were fresh, ripe, and full of nutrients. Some would last longer than others, but he knew he had enough to keep himself healthy for the entire month. Each day, he rationed his food, eating just enough to stay strong while ensuring that his supply would last. He took his time enjoying the fruits, appreciating their natural sweetness and the effort it had taken to gather them. While the prison was dark and lonely, he remained calm, knowing he had done his best when given the task. Days passed, and though the confinement was difficult, he maintained his strength. While hunger and desperation consumed the other two ministers, he remained composed. He spent his time reflecting on the lesson behind the king's test. It became clear to him that this was not just about gathering fruits. It was about preparation, integrity, and hard work. Life often presents unexpected challenges, and those who make the right choices in advance will always be better prepared for whatever comes their way. He also thought about the other ministers. He knew that the second minister's careless approach would make survival difficult, and he feared the third minister's fate. He wished they had taken the task seriously. The king's lesson was now painfully clear: what you do today shapes your tomorrow. By the end of the 30 days, the first minister emerged from his cell, strong and healthy. He had passed the test not just with his actions, but with his mindset. As the guards led him back to the king, he felt no fear, only gratitude. He had proven his loyalty, his diligence, and his wisdom qualities that any great leader should have. The second minister sat in his cold prison cell, staring at the bag of fruit he had collected. At first, he reassured himself that he would be fine after all. His bag was full. But as he reached inside and pulled out a piece of fruit, his confidence quickly faded. The fruit was mushy, discolored, and had a sour smell. He hesitated for a moment, but hunger gnawed at him, leaving him with no choice. He took a bite, wincing at the unpleasant taste. Days passed, and the reality of his mistake became painfully clear. Many of the fruits he had gathered were already rotten, and those that weren't had started to decay. With no fresh food to sustain him, his body weakened. His stomach twisted in pain as he forced himself to eat whatever he could salvage. Each meal became a gamble. Some fruits made him sick instantly, while others gave him just enough energy to make it through another day. As the days dragged on, his condition worsened. His body grew frail, his face pale. The sickness from consuming spoiled food took its toll, and soon fever set in. He felt dizzy and weak, barely able to move. He regretted his choices, realizing that a little more effort in the forest could have changed everything. He had thought he was being smart by cutting corners, but now he understood the price of carelessness. By the third week, he was too ill to stand. His breaths came in shallow gasps, and his vision blurred. He knew he wouldn't last the full 30 days. His mind drifted to the first minister, who had worked hard and was likely faring well. He envied his diligence, but was too late to change anything now. Before the final days of imprisonment, his body could take no more. He succumbed to illness, a victim of his own laziness and poor judgment. His last thought was one of regret. If only he had taken the task seriously, he might still be alive. In the darkness of his prison cell, the third minister sat against the cold stone wall, staring at the bag he had once been so proud of. At the time, he had believed he was clever, outsmarting the king's test, filling his bag with dry leaves and stones instead of real fruit. But now, as hunger clawed at his stomach and weakness overtook his body, he realized the devastating truth. His bag was worthless. There was nothing inside that could save him. At first, he tried to deny reality. He told himself that the king would surely change his mind and release them early. But as the days passed and no food came, panic set in. He watched in agony as his strength faded. The hunger that had started as a dull ache became unbearable. His body grew weaker with each passing hour. He was trapped, forced to face the consequences of his laziness and dishonesty. By the end of the first week, he could barely move. His mind raced with regrets. Why hadn't he just done the task properly? Why had he assumed that shortcuts would always work? He thought back to the first minister, who had worked hard and was likely surviving with ease. He had laughed at him before, but now he envied his diligence. The second minister, careless as he had been, at least had something to eat. But for him, there was no second chance. His time was running out. Before the 30 days were over, the third minister succumbed to starvation. His greed, laziness, and dishonesty had sealed his fate. This story serves as a powerful reminder that our choices today shape our future. In real life, success doesn't come from shortcuts or deceit. Whether in school, work, or personal growth, those who put in effort and act with integrity are the ones who thrive. Meanwhile, those who rely on dishonesty and laziness may seem to get ahead temporarily, but eventually their choices catch up to them. The truth is simple: hard work and honesty always lead to lasting success, while shortcuts and deception lead to regret and failure.